Hi folks, Roland Martin here with another YouTube adventure. You know, I get a lot of comments all the time and people are pretty confused about what kind of jigs to use, because jigs is one of my favorite lures for big fish. And I use three kinds of jigs. In fact, that's about all the kinds of jigs there are. There's really a fourth kind, but I'll explain that too. But the three kind of jigs I want to talk about today are flipping jigs, casting jigs, and swimming jigs. And I'll show you the difference. I'm going to show you the trailers, I'm going to show you the sizes, and I'm going to show you the rods and reels to use them with. Okay, let's start with my favorite, the flipping jig. Now, on Lake Okeechobee, there are mats of reeds, there's lily pads, there's pepper grass, there's all sorts of things all around hyacinths. And we take these big 1 ounce and 3/4 ounce big flipping jigs. That's different than a casting jig. It's different than a swim jig, and let me explain it. It's got a really blunt head. It's big and heavy. It's like really heavy, and it's got a super heavy hook. That hook is just a monster of all monsters, and we're running 65-pound braid many times. That's really heavy line. That's a double weed guarded jig, and for a trailer, I really like these new Cowboy Series trailers now. They're made out of a much harder plastic. You know, one of the things about Yamamoto baits, have had soft plastics for many years, but now with the new Cowboy Series, it's a beautiful trailer for a jig, by the way, and that black and blue is just a great compliment for this black and blue jig. And I just come through about 1 inch and just slide it back up underneath that skirt, and you get it over that little clip, and that is just a great little trailer. It just really does a job on, say, Lake Okeechobee. But I was using it at other places. I use it all over the country, and it's a great flipping setup. Now let me talk about the flipping setup itself. This is Favorite's rod, one of their heaviest rods. It's a 7.4 extra heavy action, and that's what you want. You want really heavy actions in a rod. I put a cushion button on the back because I kind of anchor the rod into my stomach when I flip into a spot. I'm a line watcher. And also I've put a little back pressure on it when I feel the strike. I have it in that perfect strike position, so I don't have to go very far. You want to set the hook quick with the jig. It's not like a worm. You get to kind of hold the rod in a kind of a low strike position, and when you see the line jump, or if you feel that little back pressure, a little tick, boy, you got to crack them hard and have a tight drag and just crank them on out. Well, anyway, that's my flipping jig. And you know, of all the tournaments that I've won on Lake Okeechobee, and of all the tournaments that everybody wins on Lake Okeechobee, flipping and this type of setup and this type of jig wins about 80% of them. So it's the big bass complement for Lake Okeechobee and all of South Florida as well. You talk about the Everglades, you talk about Kissimmee chain of lakes, you talk about every kind of chain of lake, in particularly the Florida lakes. The flipping guys with the big heavy jigs are usually the winners. Okay, that's the number one lure. Okay, now number two lure that I use an awful lot is just a regular casting jig. Now I fish other lakes. You know, when you tournament fish, you fish, say, the White River chain of lakes, which is Bull Shoals and Table Rock, and those lakes like that. And so with that lake in mind, those kind of lakes in mind, I kind of downsize a little bit. This is a 1/2 ounce model football headed jig. Now that's just a perfect little green pumpkin looking trailer, and it's a little green pumpkin jig. A football jig kind of has the tendency to go over the rocks and gravel without getting hung up so bad. So it's a pretty big deal having a football headed casting jig on, say, a gravel or a rocky lake. Now, for a rod, I want about a 7-foot medium heavy action. And this is a favorite prototype rod that I'm using right now. It just has just the right amount of action. And for that, I'm using a 50-pound braided line up to about a 4-foot leader of this case, 17-pound fluorocarbon leader. And so I have a small little knot there on the area. It's just a little bitty small knot. It's hard to see, but it's a little double uni knot, very strong, and I have it super glued as well. And it's a 90-something% knot. So the braid is 50, the fluorocarbon 17. Okay, I tightened my drag down a little bit. Now, with my jig fishing, it's much like a worm. It's almost like a worm, except that I don't let them run with it very long. In other words, when you get your jig strike, you know, when you feel that tonk, you got to get on them quick. I mean, 1 second, 2 seconds, you better be hitting them. So it's a pretty fast operation. But again, it's watching that line. It's feeling. That's why I like the braid. The braid is such a big deal here, because say on a long 50 or 60 foot cast, and I'm out in 10 or 15 or 20 feet of water, that fish hits it in it might be a Kentucky bass, might be a smallmouth bass, might be a largemouth bass. But whatever it is, it's kind of hard to feel the strike in 20 feet of water. That's where the braid comes in. And the other thing that the braid comes in is that it sets the hook a lot better. You know, you're way off on a long cast, you can really get this hook set really, really well. Now, also with that in mind, the jig itself doesn't have a real big hook. It has just a medium-sized hook, but a very, very sharp hook. I mean, it's as sharp as can be. But anyway, that is my casting jig setup. Now, there's other kinds of jigs that I use for casting. You can cast about any kind of jig. You can cast a flipping jig for that matter, but if you had it light enough. But I get a whole bunch of different ones here. Some of them just have a regular head to them. That's a casting jig. There's 2 or 3 different sizes here. I use anywhere from 1/4 ounce up to about 3/4 of an ounce when I'm casting a jig. Now, I'll even take a flipping jig on occasion, and if I were fishing, say, Kentucky Lake, and I'm fishing the big ledges, you can cast a flipping jig, but it's a different setup. It's a different rod. You know, so that is a possibility. Okay, now here's another thing to consider when you're talking about jigs. Kitech, for example, they make some jig heads that are made out of tungsten, and they're heavier, so they're a smaller profile. So when you look like at this one right here, it looks like about 1/4 ounce jig head, and it's really I think it's a 1/2 ounce. It's a 1/2 ounce setup. It's a 1/2 ounce. That's a 1/2 ounce casting jig, and yet it's small. So that's a perfect combination for, say, deep water smallmouth. Perfect combination for working Kentucky bass or spotted bass on the deep reservoirs in the mid part of the country. Those smaller jigs with the smaller profiles really pay off. So when you're talking about a trailer for a lure like this, you don't want a big, bulky trailer. That trailer would be really too big for this little jig. That trailer's just too big. That's that flipping jig that I was showing you, the cowboy trailer. It's just too much jig. So what you have to do, there's a whole bunch of different combinations you can go with. You can even take just little plastic worms, little 4-inch worms, and use the end of the worm. So that makes a good trailer. There's a lot of different little trailers. Sometimes we use the little chunks, the little super chunks by Zoom. That works. There's some of the Reaction Innovation trailers that we have. Any kind of small trailer, you might have to try a bunch of different colors. Now, the one other thing that I do is sometimes I use the different colors of worm dye when I'm using the spike it stuff, and sometimes I'll dip the tail. One of the really good combinations is, say, here's a green pumpkin jig, I'll dip the tail and say that's chartreuse dye, and that sometimes really lights it up. Well, there's more than one color. You know, there's a red that you could use. You know, there's blue. If you're using a white-colored lure, you might put a blue tail on there. There's pink. This pink is just really cool. That pink is so cool. Sometimes I've gotten a lot of fish on that pink. That thing's really a big deal. But anyway, I experiment with tails. I dip the tails with a lot of the jigs. I'll make it, particularly when I have the green pumpkin, I dip it the chartreuse. That's really a big deal. Okay, so that covers 2 of them. Let's go to my third choice, and it's so much fun. This is the fun deal. This is the swimming jig. The third jig that I want to talk about is swimming jig. Now, this happens to be a 1/4 ounce model, and this is complete with this new little Zako. This new little kicking Zako. It's a brand new prototype lure by Yamamoto, And you're talking about a nice combination. That's a beautiful, beautiful setup with a 1/4 ounce head. That's so perfect. 1/4 ounce head, the Zako body. That I'm running that on straight 20-pound fluorocarbon because I've just been fishing Lake Okeechobee. That just happened when I was fishing the edge of some grass beds. It was just perfect. Now with a swimming Senko or with a swimming jig in general, what you want to do is just cast past the target and just swim it along. And you can let it go to the bottom if you come to a nice little hole in the grass. Say you're in pepper grass or some kind of grass and there's a hole there, you can swim it along and then drop it in the hole. Okay, that's a big deal. But a lot of times you're just swimming it through the lily pads. You're swimming it, and the design of the swimming jigs, that is such a design that it swims right through lily pads. It comes right through brush. It comes through all sorts of grass. It doesn't get hung up very much. Now you have to, the lighter the jig, of course, the easier it is to get through there. If you use a big heavy one like a 1/2 ounce or 3/4 of an ounce, it's gonna get hung up more. But these 1/4 ounces, they really come through heavy grass and lily pads really, really well. Okay, that's one combination. Another combination is, say, the green pumpkin deals. That's a 1/4 ounce and a green pumpkin. There's a bunch of different lures that I have here. Here's another swimming Senko. This is a 1/4 ounce that I just love it to death. I forgot the name of that jig, but it's a 1/4 ounce. And sometimes I'll take the Reaction Innovation jig heads. The Reaction Innovation has a little trailer that's really a nice little complement to this. I like the Zako better. It's similar to the Zako, but I tell you the Zako is really a killer. But that is a smaller little profile than the Zako, but it's about the same kind of thing. So if I were running this swimming Senko here, or rather swimming jig here, that 1/4 ounce model, that would be a good combination right here. Swimming that combination right there, that's really, really perfect. But the rod combination I use for this swimming jig is basically I'm trying out this new 8.1 to 1 ratio reel. It's a high-speed reel. Casts pretty good. Really gets me some high speed. I'm using a 7-foot medium heavy action rod. 7 foot, just a good all-around 7-foot medium action rod. I can make a nice long cast with it. And with that 20-pound fluorocarbon and this 8 to 1 reel retrieve, and that's a big handle reel, by the way. You can kind of really put some pressure on it. I can get some pretty big fish on it. Now, sometimes you're throwing it through really thick cover. You're throwing it through brush. You're throwing it through little button bushes up in the shallow water. Say it's your bull shoals and there's buckbrush everywhere. You can't get by with, say, 20-pound fluorocarbon. You might have to go to straight braid. So find yourself a jig that has a heavy enough hook to handle that heavy braid. Well, that kind of covers the whole thing right now. So listen, I post every Wednesday about 6 o'clock and every Sunday about 6 o'clock, and every Fridays I do like a little Friday what's up, Roland? What's happening, Roland? It's an update for the week, and that's a neat little deal. Boy, your subscriptions helped out so much. I'm doing so well now with my YouTubes. All my advertisers are happy. Everybody's happy, and it's just thanks a million. Just thank you here for your subscription and for your attention. And I get a lot of requests and a lot of comments, and I just read them all. I just read all your comments. I really do. And so keep them coming. I'll keep answering them. And I'll keep trying to give you really good videos. I enjoy doing this, so we'll see you again soon. Thanks for watching.